93, yo, 131, the Grumpy Thelemite here. Today we're going to be talking about Liber Resh, or simply Resh, Aleister Crowley's fourfold Solar Adorations, or Solar Invocations, that are supposed to be done every day, 4 times a day, by all magicians, especially those who are interested in Thelemic Magick, or Aleister Crowley's system of magic. So you can find the text of Liber Resh on thelemicunion.com/liber-resh. There will be a link below in the description. So here we have the text. First of all, we have the title, Liber Resh vel Helios. Liber Resh vel Helios subfigura CC, or 200. Liber means book, so book Resh, and Resh is a Hebrew letter. That means head, and it's attributed to Atu 19, the sun, in the tarot. So we can see that Resh is attributed to the sun, so it's essentially Liber Resh, or Book of the Sun. Vel means or also. Helios, so the Greek name of the sun. So we have Book of the Sun, or the sun, right? So Liber Resh, or Liber Helios, means, and everything is pointing back to the sun here. Subfigura CC, which means under the figure or under the number of 200. Those are Roman numerals. And as some of you might know, every Hebrew letter is attributed to a number. So Resh is attributed to the number 200. And so, again, this points back to Resh, and Resh is attributed to the card, the sun, in the tarot. So this is basically saying Book of the Sun, or the sun under the figure of the sun, in case you didn't get the message. So this is one way that understanding the Kabbalah, specifically the Hermetic Kabbalah that Aleister Crowley laid out in his book 777 and other texts, it's a way of understanding why this is important to know. It kind of helps you decipher these little Kabbalistic puzzles. At least it helps you understand the deeper meaning of things like the title of this text. I want to warn you about getting a little too deep into the Kabbalah, as I call it. It's very easy to lose the forest for the trees. Right? So it's important to take a step back and see the big picture here. It's very easy to say, oh, that's so cool how these things line up and how these all point to these different tarot cards and different Kabbalistic attributions. But in the end, this is basically just saying this is a book about the adorations of the sun. And what is the sun? Are we adoring that gaseous ball of light in the sky? Not really. That sun is the material image of God, or of the absolute, whatever you want to call it. And the purpose of doing rituals in Thelema is essentially to perform the great work, which is to know and do your true will. That sun represents our true self, and its motion represents the true will of each individual. So when we revere the star, or when we revere the sun, we're actually revering the Godhead within ourselves. Like it says in the Book of the Law, every man and every woman is a star, and the sun, in fact, is a star. So this all kind of lines up and shows us that Liber Resh is basically an invocation of our Godhead under the figure of the sun. So why don't we take a look at the text? I'm basically just going to go through this text and show you the basics of what it means and how you might do it and how to understand it. It's actually quite short, so the entire text you can see here, it's just that long. Just this text right here. And so you'll actually see that it's even shorter than you might think, the actual performance of the ritual. Before we get into the text, actually, I want to take a step back and explain why you would do this. I've already mentioned that all rituals are toward the end of accomplishing the great work, knowing and doing your true will. In particular, Liber Resh, or simply Resh, is the practice of being mindful of the great work 4 times a day. So you go about your mundane life. Most of the time you have your mind absorbed with mundane concerns. You've got to get up, you've got to eat, you've got to go to work, you've got to talk to this person, do that errand, this and that. You have all these stresses and concerns. Resh is a way, at least 4 times a day, to briefly remind yourself of the great work, to remind yourself of the sacred rather than the mundane. The idea is eventually you'll fill your day with sacred activities or a kind of sacred mindfulness of your desire to accomplish the great work, and your life will slowly become more sacred rather than mundane. So the first purpose of Resh is to remind yourself, be mindful of the great work. The second is to align yourself with the cycles of nature, with the course of nature. So this ritual is done at sunrise, at noon, at sunset, and at midnight. So you're aligning yourself with the course of the sun. Of course, everything in our world now is artificial. We wake up and we fall asleep pretty much whenever. We have artificial lights. We have artificial everything. So we're completely detached from the natural course of events, from nature's basic cycles. So when we greet the sun at dawn, at noon, at sunset, and at midnight, we're aligning ourselves with the daily cycle of nature. And of course, that daily course of the sun is a kind of microcosm or image in a smaller way of the annual cycle, the yearly cycle of the sun. So dawn corresponds to spring, noon corresponds to summer, sunset corresponds to autumn, midnight corresponds to winter. So we are aligning ourselves to the cycles and the rhythms of nature through this. Finally, Crowley mentions that for advanced students, this ritual draws magical power from the sun. Again, we are not drawing physical power from the gaseous ball in the sky. At least through this ritual, of course, we get vitamin D and other actual forms of energy from the physical sun, but that's not really the idea behind this ritual. The sun is, as you should know, the most ancient and universal symbol of God, of divinity, of the absolute, whatever you want to call it. And so we can't get caught up in the details too much, right? This isn't a planetary invocation of sorts. This is a general invocation of your Godhead under the figure of the sun, right? And this is, in fact, an invocation, like I've said several times. So a lot of really stodgy people, especially ones that have Golden Dawn training or are interested in the Golden Dawn, insist that invocation means you say certain words, you yell certain things in certain languages you can't pronounce very well at the walls, and you trace pentagrams or hexagrams in certain ways in order to invoke, and that's the only way to do it. That's absolutely wrong. Invocations have been done of all types by pretty much all cultures in many different ways, and I assure you, pretty much absolutely none of them traced pentagrams and hexagrams in order to do that. They did various orations, dances, different things. So don't get caught up in the details and insist things have to be a certain way. Invocation is a very general term, and Resh, the practice of Resh, is absolutely a kind of invocation. An invocation of your Godhead, your true self, the entire purpose of the great work. So, moving on to the text itself, we see Liber Resh vel Helios sub figura CC, AA publication in Class D. So Aleister Crowley, he was a little extra, and he organized all of his texts into Class A, B, C, and D, and eventually he added a Class E as well. Class D is specifically the official rituals and instructions of AA, Astrum Argentum, or whatever, Astron Argon. There's lots of different names for it. AA is essentially the eternal hidden college or hidden group of all those who have attained. So anyone who is ever enlightened, anyone who has ever attained in some spiritual way, in some sense belongs to the AA, right? So Crowley said that Buddha, Lao Tzu, Moses, these people were all magi of the AA. Obviously, these people did not join the organization that Crowley formed in 1907. That is a kind of temporal, material organization. And frankly, I personally do not think that any of the organizations that bear this name have a direct connection to that material organization that Crowley made. A lot of them will claim that. One in particular insists that it's the only true AA, and that's how you know it probably isn't. But AA, we should remember, was meant as this general, eternal kind of order that anyone who does the work and accomplishes the great work belongs to by the fact that they attained and nothing else. So anyone who is trying to accomplish that great work is, in a sense, an aspirant to the AA, and you don't need to belong to any organization to do that. We should remember that Liber Resh, the text here, and pretty much all the rituals you think of as Thelemic Magick were published in something called the Equinox, which Crowley published publicly. It was not secret. He meant for this to be a kind of Rosetta Stone of occultism and magic in case of some kind of apocalypse. So in case there's an apocalypse and someone manages to completely preserve 10 giant volumes in their library, it was meant to reconstruct the system and be able to attain using these things without having any material connection to any group. So you absolutely do not need to be in any organization, AA, OTO, or any other acronym, in order to do these practices or to be successful. So getting to the text finally. We see here, these are the adorations to be performed by all aspirants to the AA. So Crowley was pretty insistent that anyone who had something to do with his system, anyone who's doing magic in this Thelemic system, should be doing the fourfold adorations of the sun of Resh every day. So we're going to see that there's some memorization that's needed, but it's actually not too much. There's a kind of structure or template that's used, and only a few words change based on what time of day or what adoration you're doing. So number 1, let him greet the sun at dawn, facing east, giving the sign of his grade. So first of all, dawn or sunrise corresponds to east. So you're going to be facing 4 different quarters, 4 different directions. East is for sunrise. And then you give the sign of your grade. So this refers to people who are in Crowley's AA, and there were different grade signs or ritual signs that corresponded to the different grades. There's an old site called Thelemipedia, which probably hasn't been updated in probably 10-15 years now. But there's one of the pages there is called Ritual Signs. You can look it up. I'll also put a link in the description below. And you can see the different grade signs here. Alright, so there's Earth, God set fighting for 1 equals 10, the neophyte grade. And if you were a neophyte, you would give this sign in all 4 quarters. If you moved up, you would give this sign, the sign of Shu, in all 4 quarters. Since I'm guessing you're not in the AA or some other organization that's teaching this, otherwise you probably wouldn't be watching this, you actually would give 4 different grade signs for the different times of day. So actually, what corresponds to east and at dawn or sunrise are what's called the LVX signs. So it's these 4 signs here. The first is Osiris slain in the sign of the cross. The next is Isis mourning in a sign of a swastika, giving the letter L. The next is Typhon or V. And the final one is Osiris risen in the form of kind of an X with the arms across the chest. So many people teach that at dawn you give these 4 signs, but honestly I don't think you need to do all 4. I think you can just go with Osiris slain, because the cross actually kind of esoterically contains all the letters of LVX. As you can see in this image, the cross contains an L, contains a V, and it contains an X. Right? So this sign, Osiris slain, actually kind of secretly contains all 4 of the signs. If you really want to go full in, you could do all 4 of these signs, and then you would return back to Osiris slain while you say the oration. So going back to the text, let him greet the sun at dawn, facing east, giving the sign of his grade, in this case, the sign of Osiris slain, the sign of the cross. And let him say in a loud voice, Hail unto thee who art raw in thy rising, even unto thee who art raw in thy strength, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the uprising of the sun. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Rahu abideth at the helm. Hail unto thee from the abodes of night. So, at each quarter there's a different Egyptian god, or Egyptoid god, that is mentioned. For east and sunrise, it's Ra. For noon, it's Ahathur. For sunset, it's Tum. And for midnight, it is Kefra. I think you should know that these are not really ancient Egyptian gods. It's why I said they're Egyptoid. If you look up a lot of these gods, they are not going to correspond to these quarters in the same or correct way. For example, Kefra is attributed to midnight in Resh, and pretty much all actual Egyptological sources show it as a kind of dawn or rising sun god. That doesn't mean Crowley is wrong or that this ritual should be changed. It means that these are magical attributions. So Ra at sunrise, Ahothor at noon, they're attributed this way because because Crowley made them this way, and that's what hundreds if not thousands of Thelemites do every day. So it's kind of built into the magical egregore, so to speak. The more you try to insist these are real ancient Egyptian gods and go back into ancient Egyptian texts to try to understand them, I think the more you'll actually stray from the spirit of this text and the ritual. Of course, studying this stuff, learning it doesn't necessarily hurt, but I think a lot of people are led astray as if these are actually ancient Egyptian gods being invoked, when really they're just 4 images of the sun. These are all meant to be sun gods, and again, the sun god is just an image of your true self, of the divine within you. So Ra is the divine or god within you at sunrise, Ahothor at noon, and so on. I really insist that you try not to lose the forest for the trees with this or any other kind of magic. It's very easy to get caught up in the details, do all these weird historical and anthropological deep dives into things, and you kind of just lose the actual spirit of what was intended here. And it's very simple. So, hail unto thee who art Ra in thy rising. So the sun is rising at dawn, and that's why rising is using here. You'll see that this is one of those terms that changes in every one of the 4 quarters. Even unto thee who art Ra in thy strength. So the quality of the sun at dawn is strength. Who travelest over the heavens in thy bark at the uprising of the sun. Uprising of the sun refers to dawn. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Ra-Hur abideth at the helm. Again, some more Egyptoid gods. So Tahuti, or Thoth, kind of the Egyptian Mercury, stands at the front of the boat, and Ra-Hur is at the helm. He's at the wheel. So this is the idea that the sun is a kind of Egyptian bark or boat that travels through the sky. So, hail unto thee from the abodes of night. Since the sun in the quarter before dawn was at midnight, we say hail unto thee from the abodes of night. You'll find that this always corresponds to the quarter right before. So at noon, you say hail unto thee from the abodes of morning. At sunset, you say hail unto thee from the abodes of day, and so on. So that's it for dawn. You can see that this would only take a few seconds to do. You would face east, give the sign of Osiris slain, and then do this oration, hail unto thee, etc. Only takes a few seconds. So let's continue. Also at noon, let him greet the sun facing south, giving the sign of his grade. So at noon, you face south, and you give the grade sign of fire here. So you put your hands in a kind of fire triangle, put it up on your forehead, your feet together, and that is the sign that you give here. So at noon, let him greet the sun, facing south, giving the sign of his grade, and let him say in a loud voice, hail unto thee who art Ahothor in thy triumphing, even unto thee who art Ahothor in thy beauty, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the mid-course of the sun. You can see pretty much all the words are the same as the previous adoration, with some switched out. So instead of Ra, we have Ahothor, which is a kind of Egyptoid name for Hathor. And the sun is triumphing. Right? The sun is at the zenith at noon, it's the highest point, and it is triumphing at that point. The quality is beauty. So again, the quality at dawn was strength. At noon, the quality is beauty. Who travelest over the heavens in thy bark at the mid-course of the sun. Noon is the mid-course of the sun's travel throughout the sky, so to speak. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Ra-Hur abideth at the helm. So this line never changes. Hail unto thee from the abodes of morning. That's because the previous quarter was dawn in morning. So you hail unto the sun from those abodes. Let's just keep moving on. Number 3, also at sunset, let him greet the sun facing west, giving the sign of his grade. So you face west where the sun sets, and in this case, you give the sign of Shu. Right? So your hands are kind of at right angles, your arms at right angles, as if you are supporting the sky. Your feet are together. You can see in this image what's expected here. So facing west, giving the sign of his grade, let him say in a loud voice, Hail unto thee who art tomb in thy setting, even unto thee who art tomb in thy joy, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the downgoing of the sun. So in this case, the god is tomb. The station is setting, right? So it's the setting of the sun. The quality of the sun at sunset is joy, which is kind of interesting because sunset is often attributed to death. So instead of the quality being sorrow or something like that, we actually have joy, which is in line with the kind of Thelemic theology, so to speak, that existence is pure joy, including death. So, travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the downgoing of the sun. The downgoing refers to sunset. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Rockwood abideth at the helm as usual. Hail unto thee from the abodes of day. So you're hailing unto the abodes of day because it was noon previously. Finally, the fourth adoration. Lastly, at midnight, let him greet the sun, facing north, giving the sign of his grade. This is the kind of water sign here, the sign of Aramoth. So you put your hands in a kind of water triangle, put it down on your lower chest right there. You can see the image here, what it should look like. You'll notice that midnight is the water one, noon is the fire one, so they're kind of opposites there. A nice kind of symmetry in this ritual. So, hail unto thee who art Kephra in thy hiding, even unto thee who art Kephra in thy silence, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the midnight hour of the sun. Again, if you search through ancient Egyptian texts, Kephra almost always is attributed to sunrise, but in this ritual, Kephra is at midnight, and that's that, essentially. The quality of Kephra, or the midnight sun, is hiding, because it's dark at midnight, the sun is hiding, so to speak. The quality is silence. So scrolling back for a minute, the quality of the sun at dawn is strength, the quality of the sun at noon is beauty, joy at sunset, and silence at midnight. So, who travellest over the heavens at thy bark at the midnight hour of the sun. It's kind of self-explanatory. Again, Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Rahur abideth at the helm. Hail unto thee from the abodes of evening. So in a way, that's that. That's Resh. It's actually quite simple, quite easy to learn. Again, it should not take you more than a few seconds to really do this part. Continuing on, it says, And after these invocations thou shalt give the sign of silence. Sign of silence, you can look that up here. It's when you place your forefinger to your lips. Just a simple kind of silence symbol. The sign of Harpocrates, or Hoorparkrot. So after every time you do one of these orations or adorations, you give the sign of silence. And afterwards thou shalt perform the adoration that is taught thee by thy superior, and then do thou compose thyself to holy meditation. So this refers to an adoration that is taught to people if you're in the AA or some other organization. In my opinion, it's not absolutely necessary. A lot of people do the adoration from the Book of the Law here, even if they're not part of an organization. So in the Book of the Law, there is this little oration that starts Unity Uttermost Showed, and it goes all the way down to Abide with me, Rahur Kuit. This little part in the middle is often excluded. So for most people, they do the adoration for the quarter, and then they often go into the sign of Osiris risen here, crossing the arms across the chest, right over left. And they do this adoration starting with Unity Uttermost Showed through Abide with me, Rahur Kuit. The part that pretty much everyone seems to neglect is the next sentence. And then do thou compose thyself to holy meditation. So this isn't a particular meditation. It's not a holy meditation as opposed to an unholy one or something like that. But it does obviously refer to the fact that Resh is to precede a period of meditation. So in total, Resh should involve the oration to the corridor, that god of the corridor, and then if you like, going into the sign of Osiris Risen and doing the Unity Uttermost Showed adoration, and then going into your seated meditation. So this is neglected by a lot of people, I think. I think a lot of people don't even know this is part of Liber Resh, the text. But it does seem like a very important aspect to this. So that is essentially the full practice of Resh. In theory, it's quite simple. In practice, it might take you a little while to memorize and to get used to doing all the signs and the orations and all that. But practice makes perfect. So just to finish out the text, number 6 says, "Also it's better if in these adorations thou assume the God form of whom thou adorest, as if thou didst unite with him in the adoration of that which is beyond him." So that's a lot of technical words, I suppose, but this refers to the practice of the assumption of God forms. So you would essentially visualize yourself as each of the gods that you're invoking. So at sunrise, you visualize yourself as Ra, at noon as Hathor, sunset as Tum, and midnight you get to imagine yourself as a beetle god, Kefra. The idea is that this is kind of one more layer to add into the ritual, makes it a little more complex, brings more of your attention and concentration to it. So your physical body is in the sign of that ritual sign, the words coming out of your mouth are the adoration, and you're visualizing yourself, at least as an advanced student, as that god you're invoking. What you should remember is that you are assuming the God form of that God you're adoring as if thou didst unite with him, that God form, in the adoration of that which is beyond him. So that is a term that Crowley uses in Book of Lies and elsewhere to refer to the absolute, to Keter or whatever else you want to call it. So again, this is not about invoking Egyptian gods, these different Egyptian... Hathor is not going to show up in particular and give you benedictions. That's not the idea. These are 4 aspects of the sun, and the sun itself is an image of that which is beyond it, the one, the ultimate nameless unity. So again, this is an invocation of your Godhead, of your true self. And I encourage you to not lose the forest for the trees here, as if this is some kind of Egyptian ritual you're doing. So finally, number 7, "Thus shalt thou ever be mindful of the great work which thou hast undertaken to perform, and thus shalt thou be strengthened to pursue it unto the attainment of the stone of the wise, the summum bonum, true wisdom, and perfect happiness." Sounds pretty good to me. It's just reinforcing that this ritual is for the purpose of being mindful of the great work, as he says, of turning your attention toward the sacred, toward your task of knowing and doing your true will. So there's a few questions that inevitably pop up. The first one is, do you have to do all of these at the exact times? And the answer is, you should try. There's some value in waking up at sunrise to do this, of waiting until midnight and having kind of the exact times. Again, part of the idea is to align yourself with the natural cycles of the day, of the sun, and be aligned with those rhythms of nature. However, if you're doing this every day for months or for years, as I imagine some people do, it might be a little much, and you might start missing things just because you're not able to do the exact times. In my opinion, it's better to do them not at the exact times than to try to do them at the exact times and miss them. So most people in practice, they do the sunrise one when they're waking up, the noon one at noon or close to it, the sunset one close to sunset, and the midnight one when they go to sleep, unless they're going to sleep after midnight, of course. So some people wonder, what if I miss one of the practices of Resh? Well, you're going to die and go to hell. Just kidding. It doesn't really matter, right? So this purpose is to remind you of the great work primarily. So if you're missing a practice of Resh, that in itself is some interesting information for you. For example, if you miss the sunset Resh most of all, and you're recording this in your magical record and you notice, wow, I keep missing that sunset Resh a lot, that means you are not as mindful during that time of day, and you should put some extra effort into making sure you do Resh and generally try to stay more mindful at that time. The goal of Resh is not to punish yourself for missing it. It's really a ritual to help you bring the sacred into the mundane of your life, to remind you of the great work, and to align yourself to the cycles of nature. Beating yourself up over it really serves absolutely no purpose. Alright, so that's pretty much it for this video. If you've enjoyed it, please hit subscribe below. I should also mention that I've created a online course for Thelemic Union. It's meant to be a 120-day course to begin your magical practice in Aleister Crowley's system of Thelemic Magick. It's basically 25 to 30 lectures about these practices jammed into one course, and at least 2 of them have to do with Resh and learning Resh. There's some cool stuff like printable handouts and that kind of thing. There's a link below in the description if you're interested in that. Otherwise, please leave comments in the comment section below. Let me know what you think, or if you'd like me to discuss certain topics in future videos, I'm definitely open to that. So thank you for watching, and 93.